Well, good morning. Welcome to Selkirk Community Church this morning. So glad that you're here joining us online. It is nice when all systems are go and things look like they're working, and hopefully you can hear me. We are just so glad that we are able to gather like this. So I want to get right to some announcements before we get going. I want to remind you, if you were here last week, we attempted a Zoom call. There was a couple of hiccups, but we're going to try it again. We'd love to be able to see your faces and say hi to you out in our lobby. And so stay tuned after the service. We're going to have a Zoom link right in the chat on selkirkcommunity.online.church if you're watching us there. If you're watching us on Facebook right now, I will also post the Zoom link. Then you can connect with us right after the service. If you're over right now live on YouTube, I might be able to post the link there as well. But if you wanted to say hi to us, head over to selkirkcommunity.online.church. That's selkirkcommunity.online.church, and you can connect with us there. Already a number of people showing up online, and it's good to see you all there. I think that's all the announcements that I have at the moment. We are privileged once again to have Pierre Gilbert come and share from the Word. Just so grateful for him. He is associate professor at the Canadian Mennonite University and MB Seminary, and we had him here just a short few weeks back, and grateful that he is returning to share once again. Let's open up in prayer before he comes. Father, thank you. Your mercy is new every morning, and we lean into it, and we trust you in all things, and we are so grateful for your grace that sustains us and gives us strength. Be with those that are struggling, that perhaps have friends, family, neighbors that have passed away because of COVID. Minister comfort to them. We think and remember those that have gone through great difficulty in overcoming COVID. Lord, all the healthcare workers right now, all the school teachers, and we just ask that you would give them greater strength and grace. And we do look to you and pray that your mercy would be evident. And so, in your mercy, Lord, hear our prayer. Be with Pierre, Lord, as he brings the word of that you've given him this morning, and we thank you for him. Pray that you bless him, and I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Pierre.
Well, thank you very much, Ryan. It's great. Ryan's doing a great job here, I got to tell you that. And it's a treat to be back here with you in Selkirk, to be back in this wonderful building. I have talked to a lot of people about this building. We'll have to have a convention here sometime when we can meet in person again. And again this morning, I wish we could meet in person. This is very unfortunate, but I'm sure that by God's grace, we'll be able to meet again before too long. And I want to wish you, of course, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I would particularly wish you for a greater sense of God's presence and our Lord's joy in this coming year. So the title of my message this morning, I want to make sure you get that because it'll take me a few minutes before I get to it, but it's entitled A Blueprint for a Life-Giving Society, Some Principles from the Ten Commandments. Now, the last time I spoke here in November, I made a case for the proposition that we live in a world that no longer has the knowledge of the Christian hope. In such a world, two things are likely to happen. Some people will simply resign themselves to living in an unending and gray hyper-present, as some call it, and focus their efforts on living their vision of the good life with no horizon beyond what they can see. Or as many must, they will look for a perfect version of what society could become. That can't be avoided, for human beings need hope to live. The question is whether they will get the real thing or whether they will embrace a counterfeit. In the past century, the irrepressible human impulse to have hope devolved into a collectivist vision that led to the death of about 100 million people. Hitler, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, Stalin, just to name a few, had a glorious version or vision of what the world could be, and they were willing to kill millions to see that vision come to life. Secular humanism, which has become the predominant philosophy of our time, cannot extinguish the need for hope. The problem is that, as in the recent past, this yearning for hope may morph into the search for another utopian vision for society. Now, when we get to the Ten Commandments in my introduction to the Bible course, I usually take a good pause. And I ask the students to imagine how best we can help the poor in our society. It's my way, it's my subtle way to get them to think about what a good society might look like. And you know what? The proposal that students put forward are, some of them are quite interesting. Like mentoring or coaching, the kind of solutions that orbit around personal involvement in real people's lives. No problem with that. But then, inevitably, like a kind of a big wave, students turn into the proposals I have come to expect over 20 years of teaching. More government programs, new and higher taxes. I had one student suggest that taxes, the tax rate should be up to about 90% or so. Usually me. Yeah, I have a hard time not laughing then. Redistribution of income, enforced equality of outcomes, more government programs. Did I mention that? Yeah, okay, and on it goes. Like it's a fairly interesting conversation. Now, last year I had an African student in the class, and I could see him from the corner of my eye. I see everything in the class. And I could see him from the corner of my eyes, and I could tell he was becoming quite frustrated by this whole discussion. And so he finally blurted out at some point, you can keep your big government and your taxes for yourselves. And that kind of, threw a cold shower over the whole discussion. And after class, I went and talked to him. And what he was trying to say was this. He says, I come from a place that actually practices what these students advocate. And we have more poor people than you can shake a stick at. And what these students want to build is a poverty factory. That's why, Professor Gilbert, that's why I am in Canada and I'm not in my home country. It is after such lively discussions that I turn to the Ten Commandments. And here's why. The Ten Commandments were originally designed to help the Hebrews who came out of Egypt create and maintain a free society. Now, you see, liberating the Hebrews, from Egypt was, all things considered, relatively easy. Maintaining the freedom of the Hebrews in the Promised Land would turn out to be very difficult. In fact, it turned out to be a struggle that spread over centuries. So how do you get a people that had completely forgotten the living God over the 400 years they were in captivity? How do you get a people who only knew slavery to live as free people? You'd think that that would be the easiest thing in the world. Well, it wasn't. It turned out to be a formidable task. The conservative Jewish commentator Dennis Prager offers a very reasonable and plausible explanation for this. And by the way, if you're interested in learning more about the Ten Commandments, Dennis Prager has written a very fine book. It's a short book. It's easy to read, easy to get. And anyway, so Dennis Prager says it has something to do with human nature. He often states that the most basic human instinct is the desire to be taken care of. And sure enough, the moment things become difficult for the Hebrews who have left Egypt, they want to go back to Egypt, which is by now has become completely idealized, as in a sweet dream induced by a large piece of chocolate cake followed by a warm glass of milk. There, the text reads, there we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food that we wanted. They became completely delusional. You see, it was easy to take the Hebrews out of Egypt. It was quite another thing to take Egypt out of the Hebrews. Deep down in their hearts, they were still slaves. Don't ever forget this. The impulse to be free, to be truly free, and live in a manner that is consistent with that is not natural. We're not born with this. It's a virtue. It's a state of mind that needs to be carefully cultivated. And interestingly enough, the question of freedom, of living free, is one of the major topics in one of Paul's epistles, that is the epistle to the Galatians, and where we read, for instance, in Galatians 5:1, so Christ has truly set us free. Now make sure that you stay free and don't get tied up again in slavery to the law. The purpose of the Ten Commandments was to provide the tools needed to enable a liberated people to remain free in the land that God would give them. It was God's blueprint for a healthy, just, and prosperous society. And here I would dare say that the blueprint wasn't just for the ancient Israelites, but it is also for all men and women everywhere. You see, because human nature is exactly the same now as it was then, the Ten Commandments are as relevant today as they were 3,500 years ago. The Bible is into reality, not utopia. It recognizes that human beings are flawed. For the Hebrews that came out of Egypt, utopianism was not an option. The Ten Commandments were not designed to create a perfect society, but to create the best kind of society that could be created under the present conditions. So what do you need to create a healthy society where justice, fairness, and prosperity reign? Or even to bring it down to a more personal level, what tools do you need to have and lead a good and productive life? Now here I would suggest that if you are a young man or young woman, I would suggest you listen very carefully to what follows. It might change your life. All right, so let's do a quick survey of the Ten Commandments. We'll begin with the first four, which has something to do with God. The first four commandments provide the first and most important key to living a good life. Let's begin with commandment number 1. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt and out of the land of slavery. Now, I know this doesn't sound quite like a commandment, but here I want to remind you that in the original Hebrew, these are not called commandments as such, but they are called words, the 10 words. So that's commandment number 1, right? Puts it all into context. Commandment number 2, you shall have no other gods before me. Number 3, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Commandment number 4, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Worship God only, nothing else. Do not kneel before false gods, false kings, or false ideologies, which is even more dangerous than anything else. That is the absolute foundation to create a good society, and that is also the first and ultimate foundation to build a good life. A life that has meaning, purpose, and significance, and out of which will flow goodness and life. And that, ladies and gentlemen, has got to remind you of Psalm 1. Blessed is the one who doesn't walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord. Right? That's the center. And who meditates on it day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. There are no shortages of idols in our world. Money, sex, approval of others, that may surprise you. Nature can become an idol. Health, safety. People can fall into the trap of worshiping safety. I'll let you think about that. Now, worshiping the living God injects life, purpose, courage, and meaning into our lives. Worshiping anything else, ultimately and in due time, sucks all life and meaning out of human existence. Who we are as human beings and as communities is in great part the outcome of what some call the social genome. If animal behavior is due mostly to the biological genome, with humans, it's the opposite. Ideas determine how we will live, how we will treat each other, whether we exhibit mercy or cruelty. With humans, ideas matter most. I want you to remember that. And the younger you are, the more you should commit that to memory. With humans, ideas matter most. It's all about the worldview, the set of basic beliefs that we embrace. Beliefs about who God is, about who we are, about the universe in which we live. Good ideas lead to life. Bad ideas lead to destruction. Worshipping God, the living God, offers a center that orients and orders everything else. If this is gloriously true on an individual level, I can testify to that. It is also true on the scale of a community. If the Israelites worshipped Yahweh, they would eventually create a society that would emulate God's character, a society that would value truth, love, compassion, mercy, self-discipline, and on and on. Men and women who worship the living God constantly become a little bit more like Him every day. Those who do not worship the living God end up feeding on lies and falsehoods. Ultimately, they end up worshiping nature and become what they worship. Paul has a dire warning about what happens when human beings worship nature in Romans chapter 1. And I would invite you to read that chapter. I'm just going to read verse 23 here. And instead of worshiping the glorious, ever-living God, they worshipped idols made to look like mere people, birds, animals, and reptiles. I cannot overemphasize the importance of worshiping God. The first 4 commandments are all about impressing upon the Israelites the importance of making God the center of their worship, the center of their thinking, the center of their affections, the center of their lives. And it is no wonder that they were exhorted to recite the Shema Yisrael every day, and conservative Jews still do that to this day, right? It's found in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 to 5. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, which is really the seat of thinking, of reason, with all your soul, all your emotions, and with all your strength. You've got to be all in. The command to worship God also is critical because it puts everybody on the same level before God and the law. In keeping with Genesis 1:26, 27, and Psalm 8, which joyfully proclaims the concept of God's image in humanity, the 10 Commandments are designed. And understand, you've got to pay attention to what I'm going to say. It's going to shock some of you, okay? I understand that, but that's my job. That's what they pay me for, all right? The 10 Commandments are designed to make the individual as large as possible. Keeping in mind, of course, that the individual is to worship God as the creator of all things. Let me repeat this. The 10 Commandments are designed to make the individual as large as possible. It seeks to limit the power of the king and the size of the state. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, God is not a big fan of the kingship. For the bigger the state becomes, the smaller the individual will be. And the smaller the individual becomes, the greater the potential for the kind of oppression and murder that we've witnessed throughout the 20th century. So, first 4 commandments, they're all about God. They're oriented towards God. The next 6 are community-oriented commandments. So, commandment number 5, verse 12 of chapter 20. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. The commandment here refers to the basic respect we owe our parents, whether we like them or not. The commandment doesn't say, you shall love your father and your mother. It says, you shall honor your mother and your father. Some of you will understand what I mean by that. Some of you may not. Take time to think about it, or read Dennis Prager's little book on the 10 Commandments. The next commandment is, you shall not murder. Some translations read, you shall not kill. Kill is not accurate. The accurate verb here, the translation for the verb, is, you shall not murder. A little bit different. Good reasons for that too. Next commandment, you shall not commit adultery. This commandment recognizes and affirms the sanctity of marriage, which is picked up by Jesus in Matthew 15:19, along with his mention of sexual immorality. Lots of material for churches here to consider. Next commandment is, you shall not steal. Individual men and women should respect their neighbor's property, and so should the state. This is a commandment against the state stealing from private citizens. Next one is, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. This commandment emphasizes the importance of speaking the truth. Speaking truthfully also applies to accurately describing a problem or an issue that we may be facing. And the reason for that is very simple, because defining a problem as accurately as we can is always the first step in resolving this problem. There are issues in Canadian society, and I would add U.S. society also, because there's a kind of a mutuality there. There are issues in our society that will never be resolved until we have the courage to describe them, to define them accurately. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. The basic idea that is expressed here is that of respect for boundaries. So, if the first series of quote-unquote words are intended to provide the most basic orientation for all of life by inserting God in the center of all reality, the rest of the words are intended to safeguard the integrity of the community by avoiding, I should say, these actions and attitudes that can bring about conflict in the community and perhaps the destruction of the community. These commandments also limit the power of the king, the state, or the power of government by affirming the family as the center of civic life and by emphasizing truth, the rule of law, and private property. Totalitarian regimes grow by seeking to shift the loyalty of people away from God and away from the family to the party or the state. And they will do that by extortion, away from God and away from the family to the party or the state. And they will do that by extortion, by stealing, by the threat of violence, or by lying, redefining reality. They grow by manipulating and undermining language. And for an insight into that last statement, I would strongly suggest you get George Orwell's book, 1984. I am now recommending to all my students that they read that book and that they listen to what's going on around them, to the news, in parallel, through the filter of this great book, this great novel. Now, I have a friend who immigrated from the Congo several years ago. He's well established here in Winnipeg now. He's taken a couple of courses with me. And one day I said, listen, John, I'm going to take you out for lunch, a free lunch, right? I was going to pay for it. But you got to understand with me, when I invite you for a free lunch, it's never usually like a free lunch. There are usually questions that I have that I want to ask. I am seeking also an education for the lunch that I'm paying for. And that was certainly the case with John. So once we got to the restaurant, we're seated. I said, John, I've got questions to ask you. I didn't come here for me to talk to you. I have invited you for lunch for you to answer some questions that I have. And one of the questions that I had was this one. Why is there in the Congo so much strife, so much poverty and misery, when in fact the Congo should be one of the wealthiest countries in the world with its nearly limitless natural resources and human resources? Well, it didn't take long for John to basically tell me what he thought the answer was to that question. And he said, it's very simple. He says, you've got corruption, government corruption, no respect for the individual, no rule of law, and no adequate protection of property rights. Congolese who happen to have money, they will either hide it in their mattress, or they will invest it somewhere else, somewhere outside of the Congo. And the reason for that is because they cannot trust government institutions, they don't trust the banks, and so forth. And there you have it. One of the wealthiest countries in the world in terms of natural and human resources, but all you find is poverty and chaos. And you know what I found most interesting after this conversation was that his own experience and testimony confirmed what the economist and president of the Institute for Liberty and Democracy, Hernando de Soto Polar, what he says about the critical importance of the rule of law and property rights to create wealth and opportunities. There's videos of him you can watch on YouTube, and you will find that his message is absolutely mind-blowing. He maintains that if you can guarantee the rule of law and property rights, any poor country can pull itself out of poverty. You see, whenever the rule of law and property rights, what we find in the Ten Commandments, are being undermined, you start creating the conditions for the proliferation of violence and the oppression of the weak and the defenseless. You create conditions that foment and contribute to the growth of poverty, and I would say systemic poverty. You create poverty factories. Now, on a more personal level, here's what the second series of commandments communicate. If you're a young person, now's a good time to take notes. First of all, have the utmost respect for others and their boundaries. Number two, to the extent that you can, move away from the impulse to be taken care of. Take responsibility for your life. If you have a family, take care of your family, and then take care of your community. A few years ago, I had a Jewish lady who was taking my course on the prophets, and after one of the classes, she asked me if I could stay behind and talk a little bit. And then she asked me a question. She says, "Pierre, do you know what is at the center of the Torah?" Now, I'm an Old Testament specialist, and I didn't quite know how to answer that question. I didn't want to look stupid, so I said, "Well, why don't you tell me what is at the center of the Torah?" And she says it's very simple: personal responsibility and personal accountability. And the Torah, of course, the first 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch. She says, no people group has been as persecuted as the Jewish people, and yet they survived. Every time they were oppressed, they managed to bounce back. And this Jewish lady was certain that this ability to bounce back, to get beyond this victimhood status that you may adopt, had something to do with this value, self-responsibility and accountability, this value that had been inculcated into Jewish children for centuries. If you take responsibility for yourself, it keeps you from defining yourself as a victim and acting like one. Now, there's much more that could be said about this most remarkable list of instructions. For now, I only hope that I've been able to give you a small insight into the incredible relevance of these commandments, both for our society, but also for our own personal lives. Now, one day a theology professor who was trying to look clever, a little bit like me, once asked Jesus, which of all the commandments, which one is the most important? The most important one, Jesus answered, is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, right? The first 4 commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And then the second one is this, and it summarizes all the rest of them. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. God bless you.